Right. We're live.
Ask the question, it'll be up there in that green thing up there, if you want to ask a question. How we start the class by telling you and reminding you that you have one job in real estate. Contracts are easy, obviously. They really are. I mean, people struggle and they're afraid, but your one job is lead generation. And, you know, if you're not lead generating, then you're probably not going to be successful in the business, no matter who you are. You could have the hugest sphere of influence in the world, but if you don't make contact with them and they don't know you're in business, then you're probably not gonna be successful. So you've got to do that every day. There's a lot of different ways to do it. Do not buy a billboard. Do not advertise on TV. If you're going to advertise on social media, you have to understand that like Facebook is more for mature audiences anymore. So you need to go Instagram or TikTok or some other form, but we do a lot of Facebook on ours, but we're looking for older buyers when we do that, when we advertise. In the beginning, I thought, oh, everybody watches it. And then you see the studies, it's like, no, that was 10 years ago, right? Before you guys were born, some of you. But don't do that. Open houses are good because if somebody comes to an open house, don't think of them as just looking to see the house. They're actually coming down for a reason and they're thinking about real estate in some way. So don't be afraid to, a lot of people are, but I wear my KW shirts every day. Don't be afraid to advertise the fact that you're actually a realtor somewhere. Because people do about once a year run into me and say, you in real estate? And it's just, you know, it's just an opening to hopefully capture them as a client. But try to think every day, set a time that you're going to lead generate. And it can be as simple as making a phone call to somebody in your sphere of influence. One of the best things you can do, easiest is text, email, but one of the best things you can do is actually write a personal note to somebody. And they have Keller Williams stationery that you can buy, these little cards that are kind of nice. You can do that on. But anyhow, communicate. You're always trying to generate business. That's what it's all about, because you could be filling out contracts all day long, be the best in the world at it. And if you don't have anybody to do it for, it doesn't work very good. So I don't know how many you filled out, a lot when you were with Evan, or what did you do over there?
That's kind of where I want to learn a little bit more. Is I didn't fill out. I did like the negotiating and like a lot of the
Okay.
verbal offering back and forth and found the properties, but I didn't really get to write.
Okay. I mean, the contract's easy. You're filling in blanks, really is what it's all about. You're not supposed to be creative in a contract. You know, it's basically a form where you help assist the buyer in filling out the form. So it really doesn't take a lot of brains, you know, no offense. That part's not hard. Everybody's afraid of it because it is a contract, it's a legally binding contract, and you need to understand that. But other than that, not much to it. So let me take you through this right up here on the screen. Here's what an offer should look like. This is from Hillary Pennertz. She's over at, I think, Reese and Nichols. But she starts with this is her offer. So she starts with a pre-qualification letter, which says, look, the buyer can afford to buy this house. Is that good? And then she actually signed it. The buyer did, which makes it even better. Here is the MLS detail sheet, customer only, but notice the buyer initials it. So what she's saying is that I know what I'm buying. It's not this house over here, it's this house right here. This is a good agent when they do things like this. There she is down there. And then she has a compensation rider. She had already called us and asked us, do you provide compensation? Is your seller providing compensation? Which you're going to have to do on every transaction, right? You have to call the agent and say, you know, we're considering writing an offer. Does the seller pay compensation? And they'll tell you, and our client does. He's paying 3%. So, but she includes the compensation rider because by signing that, everybody's agreeing that, yeah, you're getting paid 3%. So she knows right up front. And then, look, she writes the contract. After she's done the other thing, she's got her buyer pre-qualified and got a letter. She's taking care of the compensation, so she knows she's getting paid. She showed the house twice. Actually, they came through on an open house and then she brought them back later on that day and showed it. So she's familiar with the house. I think she may have taken them back a second time, which is a good idea too. If you have time. And this house had been on the market probably for 30 days, so she had time. It wasn't gonna just jump off the market.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Did that compensation say that 3% is being paid to the buyer's agency?
no, it says it's paid by the brokerage to the brokerage.
Right.
So
But it's being paid to the brokerage of the purchasing side.
the buyer's agent,
Yes.
yeah.
Okay.
And that switches if you're on the other side though, right?
What's that?
Does that, I guess, so when you're writing the offer, right, you want the buyer broker to be the one responsible for it, right?
The listing broker,
Yeah, okay, yes.
yeah.
Sorry, not yes.
So if you look at
Sorry, I said
this,
the wrong
it's
one.
seller's broker compensation to buyer broker. Okay, the second one is seller compensation to buyer broker, but the seller is gonna pay it at closing. You don't want that. When you list a property, what you wanna do is find out how much the seller's willing to pay as compensation, whatever it might be. It's all negotiable. Whether it be 15 or 4, or in this case, 6. So when the agent calls you, says, yes, my seller is paying compensation and we're willing to compensate the buyer broker at 3%. It's all in the listing contract. If not, if they say, my seller's not paying anything, then you, if you're smart, would check box 2 and say, Bubba, I want 3%. Okay, that's negotiable. So the seller could say, well, I'll pay you 2, and you can go back and say, no, we want 3, because if you filled out a buyer's agency agreement, you probably put an amount in there that you want to be compensated, right? And you have to have a buyer's agency agreement, an employment agreement with the buyer to show them a property, correct? Correct?
Yeah.
Unless it's your listing, then you can show anybody your listing. You don't have to have any agreement with the developer. All right, we'll get started on the contract. You'll notice here it's Elizabeth Crowe as the buyer. Now, she was with a gentleman when they came to the open house, and she was with the gentleman when Hillary brought it back. But right now, she's the only buyer on the contract. Is that okay? Say yes. If she is married, the lender and the title company may, but the lender for sure will want her husband on there. And it's easy. Later on, you get down the road and the lender says, hey, I want your husband on there. Since you're married now, and you just have an amendment that says all parties agree that Elizabeth Crowe and are now the buyers of this property. And that you say are now are the buyers on this property. But the thing to notice on the buyer side, it could be an individual. It could be 2 people with different names, right? Elizabeth Crowe and Bob Smith. It could be Elizabeth Crowe and Debbie Jones. And in every one of those instances, they could not be married, but they could be buying together. They're getting the loan or they're buying the property together, which would be fine. That's completely separate, so we don't care about that. If you know their husband and wife, it's not a bad idea to put H and W after their names, because you're telling the title company husband and wife. Yes, ma'am.
Would this just be for like, would this, if it was like tenancy in common or like joint tenancy or like?
I don't have it. Don't even think about that stuff.
That doesn't
Yeah,
have.
you're thinking about real estate school. Forget it.
Okay.
They'll tell you that that's what they want to do. They'll tell you, somebody will have counseled them, an attorney or something will say, you should take this as, we don't ever hear those words. I've never heard those words in 30 years from a client that says, we want to take this as tenants in common or joint tenant. Never heard it.
Okay,
You just put the names down there and let the title company worry about
okay,
that. A lot of what you learned in real estate school, the title company does all that work, or the lender does all that work. All you do is generate leads, sign agreements, show property, write contracts, send it to the title company.
Negotiate.
Yeah, negotiate too.
Yes.
Yeah, yes, ma'am.
What about if it's like an LLC or like?
I was gonna say that next, so you're right there. It could be an LLC, it could be a trust, it could be a trustee, it could be, S corp, it could be all kinds of entities. But if it is, let's say it's my, corporation is Kelby Lane Incorporated. Even if I wrote Kelby Lane Incorporated as a buyer, it has to be a live person with blood in their veins signing it. So I have to have signatory rights to do that. And so if somebody says, I want to buy this in my corporation or my LLC or my trust or whatever, you say, well, we'll need those trust documents or those corporation documents. We'll need those documents at some point because we have to be sure who can and cannot sign. And we've had plenty of them where somebody has an S corp, but the husband and wife both have to sign, but only one signs, and we got to come back with an amendment. Not a big deal, but you just need to know it. Yes, it can be, or it could be a business. This could be O'Reilly Automotive. But somebody's got to be able to sign.
So I've been putting like, the person's name and then for like MFH five LLC, like whichever
You don't
LLC
have to
is
do
that. Okay, I can just put MFH five LLC. Okay,
And then you just know you have to have the documentation to prove that they can
articles.
sign. Yeah. All right, and then on the property, we used to have a legal, description on these, but we don't anymore. The attorneys, the title companies, everybody said, look, just give us a common address in the right county with the zip code and that's all good. You don't have to have the legal description. Now, if it's a property with acreage, I would suggest that they don't have a survey and you represent the buyer, you would ask for a survey and then you would have a legal description. But that's further on in the contract. But if you do have a legal description, and you check this box and it must be included in the offer. And then it's got to be initialed by all parties.
If you perchance going back just a little bit further, and you say you have a client that wants to drive around and look at properties, just, and they come across one, they say, I'd like to really see that house, and you want to show it to them. What would you, in your experience, do if they would like to do it? The house might be available to be seen, but you haven't sent in a compensation agreement or anything yet?
We can show it. The compensation agreement is included with the offer.
With the offer, okay.
You don't send it in beforehand.
Okay.
Just go ahead and show it to them. Because if you've got a buyer's agency agreement with them, an employment agreement,
Yes.
you said, I'm gonna get paid X, whatever you decide. And so what that contract says is, if the seller doesn't pay it, then Mr. Buyer, you're gonna be responsible. And it says that right in the contract. It says, now I'm gonna try to collect it from the seller, but if not, then you'll be responsible. I've never charged anybody like that, but it could happen. And some buyers are like, I don't care, that's fine,
That's it.
Purchase price, who sets the purchase price? Well, the seller sets the list price. And did you know that's just a price that's offered? It doesn't even mean, if you made a full price offer, they don't have to sell it. It's just an offering price. So the buyer is the one who determines what you're going to offer. So what you should do in most cases, if a buyer is really seriously considering a house, is think about filling out a CMA, a comparative market analysis, to see if the house is priced correctly or not. And we had a crazy market a couple of years ago. Didn't matter what the house was priced at. Everybody's gonna pay at least full price or more. But this is a more normal market. You've got time. You should go in and do a CMA and say, for example, we've got one listed right now. I think it's overpriced. It's on 540 South Hickory. You can look at it and I think it's overpriced. And it's my fault if it is, right? But also my client told me that, here's what I want, and it was within reason, but I think it might be a little overpriced. So if somebody comes in and writes an offer, it's listed at $415. If they write an offer at $395, I don't think they're that far off. It sounds a lot, 20,000, but I may have made a mistake. That's a possibility. So if we did get an offer on a property like this and it came in lower, it might be me. It might not be somebody just trying to strip out the market, but most of the times, let's say this house was listed at 269.9, I think. If they would have come in at 250, then if they were good agents, they would have had a reason why they did that. They would have told you up front. Look, I've run the comps on the neighborhood and I think it's a great house, but I think you're overpriced. And so that's why we're here. I want you to explain that. And I've included the CMA, which you can do, right? There's a quick way to do a CMA on the MLS, isn't there? You just click on CMA and do single line, and then you pick the ones that kind of compare to what you want, or what compared to this house, and then you send that over to the agent and say, look, this is what I'm looking at. Tell me what's different. They may go, well, it's got heavy duty nails. Well, that doesn't matter. It's still the same house, the same size, same neighborhood. I think a house with a roof is the same as a house with a roof down the street. Now, but if they come back and say, yeah, but the houses you're comparing don't have granite, they don't have updated bathrooms, this one's got a new roof, new heat and air, and then you might be swayed, and then you go back to your buyer and say, okay, probably we should have, counter or accept a counter if we get one. In this case, good strong offers at $269,900, they offer $267,900, and they want $4,500 in concessions. Concessions are designed, and what they're about is to help the buyer purchase the home. They typically offset inspection, appraisal, and loan costs. And loan costs are high. I mean, our commissions, are nice when we get them. But at the same time, some of the loan costs, you look at that list when you have a HUD statement pretty soon, or a closing documents, and you're just like, they met with the buyer once, they filled out a form, and then they sent it to their underwriter, and there's a lot of money involved. Anyhow, the $4,500 are to offset those. And my seller said, whoa, what, that's crazy, blah, blah, blah. And I said, it's not crazy. I said, they've saved enough money for a down payment. You see that they're qualified. They need help offsetting the cost. The other thing to remind your seller in this is that, okay, the $4,500 is going to come right off the top. So you're now at $263,400 before commission. So no surprises on that. A lot of times you can do what's called a seller's net sheet too, and say, okay, if you accept this price, pay the commission, you pay this, you pay that, you pay that. Here's what you're going to end up with approximately, not exactly. In this case, they put down $1,000 worth of earnest money, which you don't have to do. Earnest money, it used to be really important. During the craziness of the last few years, when they're going crazy, earnest money helped because it told the sellers, look, I really am serious about buying this house. But it's not required for the contract. What your buyer needs to understand, and you need to understand, if they put down $1,000 in earnest money, you'll look right below that. It said they've got 8 days to turn it in. Once it's turned in, it's coming out of their bank. So sometimes we've had people put down earnest money and they didn't have the money in the bank. And if the check is voided, then you've got a fraudulent contract and you can terminate the contract. So just make sure if they understand that. It's not going to be there until closing, sitting there. It's going to be taken out immediately and go into the title company. And then it's applied to the purchase at closing. Line 17, how many days? I'd never put less than 10 in there, but she's got 8, which is more than 5. 5 is not enough, especially if people are, like writing checks like we do. Write checks still? I do too.
Yes.
So I might need more time than that to get the money to the title company. It might be on a Thursday and I forget on Friday, and then Saturday I take my boy to do this, and Sunday I go to mass and all of this. Next thing you know, 5 days are up. So I need 10 days in there to ensure that my buyer has time to get the money over there. Yes, ma'am.
Okay, I have a question on the concessions. So it's not odd, the concessions can go towards other things too, right? Before all that, like flooring or something, right?
No.
No? Okay. So
It's
I
not a
had someone
concession.
someone the other day tried to say that that's what they're using it for. So, but then you're limited, right? Based off like the loan type of what percent of concessions they can pay?
Yeah, but on a $270,000 loan like this, that would be as much as $7,000, maybe $7,500 that you could ask for in concessions. That's probably what it's going to cost, basically.
But is there like, I think it was written, like, there's a cap though, right, for like.
Well, there is a
you mentioned,
cap
like,
somewhere.
2%.
Yeah, that whatever type of loan it is says, you know, we can't give you more concessions than this, but that's up to the lender.
Okay.
You know, if you're representing a buyer client and they told you they're working with whatever bank that was, I think it was US Bank, and you had the name of the lender, you should call the lender. Because the first question you should ask the lender is, I see they're pre-qualified to X. Do they need concessions to buy? First time home buyers almost always need concessions. Almost always of something. And the lender will tell you, yeah, they really need X, whatever it might be. And it's usually 2% at least, but it could be as high as 3%.
Can they use that concession as a part of their financing or part of their whatever?
Yeah, because
expenses?
whatever they're paying is gonna get financed. It's actually coming out of that financed amount. I mean, the seller's paying it, but it offsets the costs of the lender. Their loan origination fees, the appraisal, the inspection costs, all of that can be offset with that. Some things can't be taken, but it's rare. I mean, the lender tries to take every penny of it, which I would too.
So, and I think this is what you were kind of saying, but I'm still, for some reason, I struggled with this one. Is the lender gonna, I guess, are they gonna be paying towards the purchase price or the net price with the lender?
They're paying for whatever the contract price is.
Okay, so like the purchase one,
Contract price.
contract price, it's purchase price still, right?
Yeah, but you wanna call it the contract.
Okay, for sure.
Because
Just wanna make sure
contract
that-
price, your commission's based on the contract price. The amount of loan origination fees is based on the contract price. Everything's based off the contract price.
Okay, price.
The charge of the title company is based off the contract
Okay.
price. Yeah, don't want to ever say purchase because, for example, here, if you subtract 4,500,
Mhm.
it's really not 267. That's the actual money that the seller's gonna get. So you've got to stay with contract price. Here's a contract price that's agreed on.
Okay, so they're gonna be paying on the 267.9.
Yes, they are. Everything's based on that.
Perfect, thank you.
You're welcome. All right, on the additional earnest money where it talks about that on 20, that's usually with new construction. You know, you've gone in and said, look, you know, we decided we don't want the stone fireplace, we want a marble fireplace or something. And the builder says, well, you'll need to deposit an additional X number of dollars as earnest money. And so you'd use that form, but it's not anything for you to worry about. It's not gonna happen very often. If it does happen, you're confused, call me. All right, the closing, subject to the terms of this contract, this sale will be closed, which means the unconditional release and exchange of the deed for the purchase price, together with all the other documents that we need, lender documents, buying agent documents, seller documents, and funds required by the contract. That's what a closing is. So eventually you'll go to a closing and you'll sign all the documents and the title person will go out and say, I'm gonna make copies, and they'll come back and say the funds aren't there. The funds haven't arrived. So you don't have a closing yet, so you don't exchange keys, and the new buyers don't own the house yet until the funds are deposited with the title company and the title company disperses to everybody. All right, it says, here's where we're gonna close. We're gonna close, look at this. We're gonna close with Gabby. That's not really what it means. What the state, the Missouri Realtors want you to put there is the name of the title company. So in this case, it is Meridian. And I knew that, but Gabby would not work if it was, this were reviewed by the MREC, they'd go, who the hell is Gabby, you know? Now you could put Meridian Title Company, Gabby, or Hogan Land and Title, Angel, if you knew who their closer is gonna be. They have more than one location, so you have to put the address in there. But like with Hogan, when I'm gonna close at Hogan, I just put Sunshine. Okay? And then the date, this is really important, and buyer's agents sometimes forget to think about this. I mean, we'll all love to close next week cash, right? So that way the buyer gets the house, seller gets sold, and you get your commission. But that's not how it works. So the first thing you do when you talk to a buyer and they say, we're ready to write an offer, and the question should be, you know, about the price and all of that. When can you close? And if they tell you some date that's under 30 days, it may not happen. So you've got to think it's probably going to be at least 30 days. Now, who could you talk to find out when they could close? The lender. That's why the lender is so important. You know, you've got to be able to communicate, and they've got to be able to communicate with you pretty regular. And like if I was writing this over with Elizabeth, and I'm sitting there and she doesn't, you know, she said, I think I'm going to close on X. And I go, you know what? Let me call your lender real quick. So I just shoot him a text and say, okay, you know, I'm here with Elizabeth, writing an offer. Can she close on this date? And he might send back to say, we close anywhere between 30 and 45 days. And then we would check from that point to see what the date was. Now, all of you have phones, right? You have calendars. Don't put the closing on a Sunday or a Saturday. And everybody likes to close on a Friday, which is great, but everybody likes to close on a Friday. So it's a little crowded. You might not get your time that you want. If you can close certain times of the month, sometimes that's better for your buyer, because if you close at certain times, you may have a full month and a half without having to make the first payment. These are all things to be discussed with who? Lender. That's right. I mean, the buyer in this case, I don't think they moved in yet, because I drive past this house quite a bit. We closed on April 8th like we were supposed to, and they evidently have got another place or something like that. But let's say your buyer is in a rental situation, and you know they're in a renter. They said, we're living at Crawdad Apartments or whatever, and you go, okay, next question is? Go ahead, say it out loud.
When's your lease up?
When does your lease end? Because if they say, well, it doesn't end until September. Say, well, you know what? Before we write a contract, you better see if you can get out of that lease. And sometimes they'll let them out. Just let them out with notice. Sometimes they'll say, you got to pay us 2 months. Sometimes they'll say, no, you got a contract, you're staying. And you can tell them, look, you know, I found somebody else that'll rent it. They don't care. They've got you, and you've been paying. So you need to ask those questions. And so let's say if April had said, yeah, my lease is up June 30th, but Elizabeth, you're asking to close on April 8th, you know, why would you do that? I don't mind paying the extra. I want to be able to go in and paint and put in new flooring. Okay, great. As long as you can afford it, lender will lend the money, that's a good deal. That's why closing maybe at a certain date would give them a month and a half before they have to make the first payment. They might be okay.
Does the lender need to know maybe about that situation, since the funds in their account will be affected if they're paying two people at the same time then?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Instead of the lender, can you communicate through your title closer? And they, via that,
To the lender?
contact the lender?
No,
No?
no, you don't want another party in there. That's the only reason I like doing both sides on a contract. Because I don't have to talk to somebody else. If I talk to you, you go back and talk to your client. You might think you're telling them what I asked you or told you, but you might interpret it differently. And then they tell you something, and you don't have the old deal where you go around the classroom, you whisper in somebody's ear, and then get to the end of it, it's not anything what it was. That's kind of how it is. I don't want anybody in between if I could help it. Because the agents are the ones that are going to mess up the deal, if anybody's going to mess it up. Lender's not going to try to mess up the deal, because that's how he makes a living. But agents sometimes, no offense to you guys, try to prove, look out there, no, you can't tell me, we're not going to do that. You know, seller wants to sell, buyer wants to buy, get the hell out of the way, and let's get it done.
So you would go back to the person that signed that pre-approval letter?
Yeah, call him directly, his number's on
You're
there.
gonna do.
I'd put him right in the contact list. When you go in, I don't know about, I'm not as familiar with Command, but in .loop, you put everybody in there, you know, that's involved in the transaction right off the bat. You add them into the deal, put an email and you put the phone number and everything in there. And so I've got them right there. So if we've got a document that I need to upload that he needs to see, like an amendment for closing, I mean, he's on there too. I include him in there, and you could choose whether he could sign or view only, so. Yep. All right, we've decided we'll close on April 8th. Everything's kosher. We talked to the lender. The buyer wants to do it then. This is a vacant house, so the seller doesn't care. He wants to get it closed as soon as he can. Says possession of keys will be delivered at closing, and then brokers are not responsible for delivery of keys. We almost always deliver the keys. I know we're not responsible, we do it. Our seller gives us the keys, we give them to them. Or the seller gives us the garage door openers and the keys and we give them to them. Or a lot on the new houses, newer properties, not necessarily new houses, are going to combination locks, push button, or electronic locks, and we give them the code. They're gonna have to have the code anyway on all the locks if they're push button, because they've gotta be able to open them to change them.
Is it at all a liability if the agent, like the buyer's agent says, hey, when she does the walkthrough, if she takes the key, then? Okay, what, like for security purposes or anything, or no?
Huh?
Like for security purposes, like if anything happened, would they be like? No,
I don't worry about stuff.
okay, cool.
I mean, you're in the walkthrough, you're closing that day or the day before, you just tell the listing agent, you know, I'm gonna go ahead and pick up the keys, is that okay?
Yeah.
As long as you'll give them to the buyer,
Mhm.
yeah, you're fine.
Okay.
Yeah. Don't ever take the lockbox though, because that screws it up. If you open the shackle, it ends up being your lockbox. Evan DeShong's got two of mine that he's taken off of houses. And
You
so,
can find him.
yeah, well, I see them.
Yeah.
They list a house in Ozark or one in Highlandville or something like that, and I get the email. It's like,
Alright.
anyhow, I don't even mess with it. Attach a rider on line 34 if it's gonna be transferred anytime other than closing. Now, typically that's bad. You don't want possession by buyer prior to closing. You really don't. Buying a used house or a new house, you just don't want them in there unless you've closed. There are times when you're gonna have to do it, but try to avoid that. Possession by seller after closing. I mean, if I give you $100,000 for a house, I want the house. You don't get to stay in it anymore. It's not your house. Okay? There are times that it may be necessary, but avoid it. But I really like the limited purpose entry by buyer prior to closing. What that says is, I just want some space in your house where I can move some stuff typically. And like if they've got a 3-car garage, if I could have that one section of the in garage just to put my boxes in, because the movers come and they move all the big stuff. And you got to move all the little stuff, right? And so if you just had one garage, you could probably put everything in your house in boxes and put it in there. So I really like this, limited purpose entry by buyer prior to closing. It's a written agreement, it's a contract, says this is all I want. You tell them exactly what you want. I want the 3rd garage space. We will not enter the house, you know. Yep.
Would this be a good spot, I guess, because even if we're not using the space, like say we're gonna remodel the home, we need measurements for things so we can start right away.
Mhm.
Would that allow for that? I mean, you communicate
Oh,
with
yeah,
the agent, of
you don't
course.
have to have that for measurements. You just
Okay,
tell them,
for any testing.
we're gonna take in a contractor to get measurements and things like that.
Okay.
You don't need limited purpose entry. This is more for putting something on it. If you ever sell a farm, you'll understand this. Because farmers have what? Stuff. They got trailers, tractors, 4-wheelers, more trailers, more tractors, just stuff. And so they can't move it all in one day. If they sell their place and buy another place, they really need to move some of it. And most farmers understand that. So they'll say, you can use this section of this pasture to put all your equipment in. And maybe even move cows. I've done that before. We moved cows. You can't move 50 cows in a day typically with just a small trailer. You've got to have a big truck to do that. Well, most people don't have a big truck and it's really expensive. So anyhow, that would be the document to use.
But normally is the 2080 the normal form of a house that the buyer gets possession?
At closing.
Yeah.
That's the only time you get it.
Yeah.
But think about it. I just want you to think about why I like the limited purpose one. Say I'm over here on Marlboro Manor on the southwest side of town, but I'm moving to the southeast side of town because I want my kid to go to Immaculate Conception. All right, I gotta close that one because I don't have the equity and buy this one. And I gotta move out of that one and move into this one all in one day. Now, no offense, that's not easy. I don't care if you're your age. But at our age, it's really a challenge. So what I like to do, and I've had, especially with clients, single clients especially, if I can get that limited purpose entry, they box up everything in their house except with the general stuff that they need to live. And then the movers come that day and the movers are in and out in 2 or 3 hours. And they're moving in that night and all they've got left is unpack their boxes. You know, everything's in, furniture's in place, refrigerator's plugged in, everything's ready to go. That's why I like it. All right, we're up to page 2. Inclusions and exclusions. The property includes, but it's not limited to, because there could be some other things there, all of the following, if they are there, which are now located on the real estate, all of which seller warrants to convey to buyer free and clear at closing, and then I'll add, in working condition. Okay? They should be working. And it goes through there, and there's some things that you really need to look at. For example, like TVs, mounts, and attached antennas. We had this problem where everybody was taking their TVs like this in the mounts, and it leaves a big hole in the wall. And there's no way really to fix it, to make it look right. So the contract was changed, the mounts stay. If you want the TVs, you have to write them in the offer, correct? Yes, that's correct, Jim. Flush mounted speakers. If you see something you want, like those speakers over there is on the wall, I don't even know if they work anymore. See them?
Yes.
If I wanted those, I need to write it in the offer. If I'm confused, because is that flush mounted or is it not flush mounted? Is flush mounted mean they're even with, who knows? I'm writing it in the offer, right? Then that way I know. On systems and utilities, notice solar panels. If you see solar panels, you better start asking questions. And the first question is, are they paid for? Second question is, no, they answer say, no, they're financed. How much do they owe and is the seller paying at closing? Third question is, okay, if they're not paid for, are they assumable? Okay? Assumable meaning they've got a loan on them for like 50,000. These solar panels are horribly expensive. They do a hell of a job. You might end up with a $10 a month electric bill, but you paid 50,000 for the panels. So if you work that out, if you were paying $200 a month, so you're saving 190. Only take you 35 or 40 years to break even. Probably a bad idea.
You're assuming like the liability basically, and you're banking that you're gonna live there long enough then, right?
Yeah. I mean, it's great not to have the utility bill when you got 50 grand sitting on your house, so might rather have this
Yeah.
50 grand. I don't know. But anyhow, ask lots of questions. But if they're attached to the house, they're going with the house, and you need to make sure that your buyer is not paying for it. Propane tank will get you in trouble faster than anything else. If you see a propane tank, is it owned or leased? So if it's owned, it stays with the house. I still write it in the what's included. If it's not owned, then you need to make arrangements to find out who has the contract on it, what company it is, because that's where you're buying your gas for until you change. Look down there on the bottom of column 2. Can you see that? Electric vehicle charging stations. That's a new one, but if it's there, it stays. Now, if I had a 80,000 now Cybertruck, or what do you call those things? Yeah, Cybertruck, Tesla. If I had one of those, I'd want to take my charging station with me. I would, right? Yeah, so I would, when I listed it, I would probably exclude that and it'd be a reserve item because it's on the contract here. Now, if the buyer came in and said, oh no, I want the electric vehicle charging station currently in the garage to be included in the offer. When you see it up front, that's the way you do it.
Can you also replace it with a different brand one, like a cheaper one, kind of similar like the doorbell cameras? Can you do?
Could you replace it?
Yeah, like, cause that one is a
Yeah.
Tesla brand one and you want,
Well, I mean, yes, but that would be a conversation between the buyer and the seller, actually, the agents probably, but. Look, I got a Tesla, you got a, what else is there? What?
Ford,
Droid?
Ford,
Ford?
they have an electric line.
Oh,
The
is
Charger.
it different than the Tesla?
Yeah. There's
See, I
Ford.
thought that the other day, I was actually laying in bed thinking, Trump should, because Trump likes executive orders, they should sign an executive order that all plug-ins on electric vehicles should be universal. Just like the plug-in in the wall.
Elon did make the Tesla ones universal, but you have to have a converter now, so.
But you know what I'm saying though?
Yeah,
Make
yeah.
more sense with it.
Mhm.
Because if I pull into a gas station, if I have an electric car and they've got an electric charging station and it doesn't fit, now what do I do? I mean,
Kinda like-
Get a
kinda like
generator.
Dryers now, they're pretty much universal. Dryers have universal plugs anymore than new
yeah,
ones.
yeah.
I guess the government would have to make it more accessible though, like they would have
Why?
to pay, cause I think Tesla pays for the chargers to be installed
Doesn't
across.
matter if you dictate to them. I mean, you
Yeah.
set the rules and say, this is the rule right here.
Yeah,
It's just like all the other stuff they do, you know, air conditioning, refrigerant and whatever else that they decide. Anyhow, notice that it's there and that, if your buyer wants it and it's attached, I would still write it in as included. I'll show you where that goes in a minute. And then everything else, there's some built-in, you know, green eggs and those kind of grills. You gotta make sure that they're staying with the house. And then down at the bottom, notice on most of the houses, the shades, the blinds will stay. Curtains don't have to, but you have to leave the actual drapery hardware up there. You can't take it out because it leaves holes in the walls. So if your client wants those purple drapes, they can take the purple drapes, but they can't take the hardware.
What if they have a disagreement on something that they want to stay or go?
Counter. So look down at line 50. It says to avoid misunderstanding, because that's what you're saying. List below is included or excluded anything which you might want. So I want the TVs in the house. So I put in there, seller to leave all TVs in the house, currently in the home. Okay? I want the electric vehicle charging station. Seller to leave the electrical vehicle charging station currently in the home. I want the purple drapes. Seller to leave the purple drapes currently in the home. And at the end of all that, I'd put at no value because the lender doesn't like to see that. Now, one that's gonna get you is a refrigerator. I mean, you see that refrigerator in the picture when you're looking at the house and you see it in all the marketing materials and your client goes, ooh, I've always wanted one of those 3-door silver refrigerators. And you go, okay, if you want it, we need to include it in the offer. It must be included in the offer. And if it was me, I'm writing, stainless steel refrigerator currently in the kitchen to remain with the home. Because I don't want the refrigerator in the garage, the beer refrigerator. I don't want the wine cooler, which is a refrigerator. I want the stainless steel refrigerator currently in the kitchen.
So how do you handle it if the seller wants to come back and say, you can have that beautiful silver 3-door refrigerator, but you're gonna pay $700 for it?
Well, the counter.
And where does that 700 get involved in the process?
They would just counter. They would say, you've offered $267,900, you want the silver refrigerator, it's gonna cost you $268,600. Right, that's 700. They're just countering. And so what they're doing is saying, if you want that refrigerator, you're gonna have to pay 700.
Can that go on the loan?
That's why you put at no value. If you put at no value, the lender will still lend on it. If you don't put at no value, they'll go, you gotta take that refrigerator out of the contract. So at the end of all these things you're including, you put at no value. So, got that? So I make the offer, I ask for all these things, and then the seller goes, no, I'm taking the electric, he just counters, he's countering, right? Which is fine if he counters, and then my buyer can either accept or accept or counter or
Reject.
reject. Now, what am I gonna do? I'm gonna say, hey buddy, counter the damn thing. $700, it's not worth losing the house on. You know, you fell in love with it, you know, let's keep it going. All right, now excluded. You'll notice on this contract, if you'll look at it up here, I don't know if you can see it or not, but it says the staging items, they're not owned by the seller. We stage houses sometimes if they're vacant. And so this is really nicely staged. It's real cute. So we've already told the agent, you can't have those, you know? And so she put that in there. So the staging items are excluded. But I want you to think about what else could be excluded. Let's say they want to give you the refrigerator, like the house I've got listed, I told you on Hickory, that I thought was a little bit overpriced. Washer, dryer, 2 refrigerators, and a pool table, all go with the house. But then you get there and you go, you know, I really don't want the pool table. Or I really don't want the washer and dryer, I got my own. I really don't want those 2 refrigerators. You just write it in there, you say excluded. So if we get an offer and it says seller to remove the pool table, or exclude the pool table and all accessories, then we know that the seller's got to move it. You know what's going to happen, don't you? That pool table gets excluded, guess what's going to happen? You guys haven't been in it long enough. I'm buying it. I'll just take it to my house. I've already bought 3 during my career, and the 2 of them are gone. I got rid of them because we didn't use them. I could use another one, you know.
What's the nicest way to say, like, some of them we buy are more like investment, whatever, you know, and people will leave like stuff,
Junk?
yeah.
You
How
put-
did you say nice?
You put right there and excluded seller to remove all items from the home that are not attached. And then in parentheses, trash, junk, clothing, etc. You just put it right in there. And then you write it again in the special agreements. Because once it's signed, then you've got them on, you know, you're holding on to it. There's other things too, though. Above ground pools, who loves them? You know, they're pretty nicely done anymore, but maybe you don't want an above ground pool. So you just say, seller to remove the in-ground pool or the above ground pool before closing. Or the gnomes. You like gnomes? You like 57 of them? No, seller to remove all gnomes except for the one that looks like Dodo or Dobie or somebody. Prior to closing. Deal? Got it? Don't mess this one up. We had an agent yesterday, if you were at sales meeting, he didn't read line 17 and his seller had to buy washer and dryer for the new buyer because he took the washer and dryer with him. You don't want that. That'd be a bad mistake. Refrigerator's gonna get you at least once in your career because you're not gonna pay attention. So don't do that one either. You're gonna pay attention because you're really smart. All right, is it contingent on the sale of, or closing of any other existing property? No, it is not. That's a good thing, right? All they're doing is getting a loan and closing. On line 59, it says the contract is contingent upon the sale and or closing, and that's 2 completely different things. So if I have my house listed and I write an offer, it's contingent upon the sale and closing, but it's listed, right? If I don't have my house listed and I write an offer, it's contingent upon the sale and closing, but I don't have it listed yet. So the question you ask, if somebody writes this, is you, as a listing agent, say, is the house listed yet? What's the address? Of course, it'll be in the contract, the contingency contract. But you'll go look it up. You'll ask them at what phase of the transaction they're in. And if they say, well, you know what, we just put it on the market yesterday or 2 weeks ago, we haven't any showings yet. You might not want to accept the offer, or you might counsel your client. But if you're representing the buyer, you're pushing hard for that seller to accept it, right? You know, give me time. Let me get this thing on the market and get it sold. If
So
it's already,
is that when you smile, if they have not listed it, because you can say, I will list it for you and we'll get it on the market and we can.
no, they're their clients. No, you can't do that. Wouldn't last very long doing that. The key to this is you have to know whether it's scheduled to close, okay? That's one rider. And when the date is, because that's when you set your date for this one to close, the one you're trying to buy. Or if it's on the market and active, but it hadn't sold yet, then you have to counsel your seller, if you're representing the seller. If you're representing the buyer, you're pushing like hell to get the seller to accept it because it doesn't cost them anything. The buyer can make the offer and sit out there and just hope that it sells. But a house with a contingency on it typically takes longer to sell and doesn't get as many showings. The key to this is though, if you check that box, you've got to have one of these two riders. You understand? Okay, not being in the business, sometimes if you haven't been in the business, you're like, what do you mean? Existing property for sale.
Yeah, my parents kind of had a thing with that when they were selling their house. They were gonna do a contingency, but they never did because it was so difficult, so.
Well, the contingencies are hard. They really are. What you hope is that your buyer is able to do what's called a HELOC. You know, a loan on their house, which they can, you know, tie to the other house and buy that other house and then have time to sell their house. Or they've got cash and they just buy the other house and take the time. The one we're selling on Hickory, that's where they're at. They don't know anything on the house. They're in Texas, they already closed on their other house. That's a good one. All right, the appraisal contingency. You want to check this box on most purchases because you want to protect your client. So I did not think this house that sold for $267,900 would appraise. I recommended to the seller that it be priced at $255,000. And he's an investor and he had done all this remodeling and it took him forever. You know, here's what I think the value is. Hell, it appraised, you know. So that was good. But let's say you're 20 days into the transaction and it doesn't appraise. You get the appraisal back and then it says the house appraised for $255,000. Then you representing your client, you use the appraisal notice, which is on line 71, and you say, the house appraised for $255,000. I've attached the appraisal. My buyer would like you to reduce the price to $255,000. And I'd already prepared my client. I said, you know what? The chance this won't appraise. You know, so you better be ready. So if you get a house that appraises under your contract price, there's four options. One, you accept it and pay the difference. Two, the seller reduces the price all the way to the appraisal, whatever it is. Three, the buyer and seller negotiate and maybe come to an agreement to split the price difference between the appraisal and the contract price. Or four, the buyer terminates without penalty. You're out of the contract. Because the lender will lend up to the appraised value, but they're not going to lend more than that.
For if you were selling this property and you're worried about it appraising, should you be more hesitant than to give concessions?
Yes.
And then I guess, because they go off the contract price.
Well, no. Yeah, they go off the contract. The appraiser goes off the contract price, yes.
Okay.
Yeah, I'd be more hesitant, but at the same time, like I said, we were 45 days into this. We were looking for anything, so.
So you're gonna push.
And I'd already warned him. If it didn't appraise, it didn't appraise.
Do you think an appraisal gap at the contract point would raise like questions?
I hate those.
Mhm.
I really do. I don't think that's fair to a buyer. Where you say, you know, we'll do an appraisal, you know, of this amount, you know, 5,000 or 10,000. Why would you make them pay more? When the market was crazy, they did it all the time. Market's not crazy now. I still think this house is overpriced. I mean, was overpriced. It's closed, so evidently it's not. That's market value. But I thought it was, you know. Single level home, totally remodeled, but it's built in 1950. But it did have new windows, new paint, new roof. I
Do you
mean,
think you can have any effect on the appraisal?
what's that?
Like meeting the appraiser out there, showing them, putting together a whole thing?
Good luck. I mean, you kidding?
Yeah.
They typically,
Worth a
they don't
try.
care. They're pretty independent.
Yeah.
And once they, if they underappraise something, or not underappraise, but they appraise it at a lower value than the contract, About the most you're gonna get them to change it, even if you convince them that they were wrong, is 2%. So let's say that they're going 255 on this one. It wouldn't have done any good, right? 1% would be 2,500. But it would have increased the appraisal to 5,000, would have been 260, there's still been $7,900 under contract price. So again, the buyer can go ahead and pay that if they want to. A lot of times they don't want to. You know, they don't want to pay more than what is appraised for. So seller can come down, buyer can come up and split the difference, or the buyer can terminate the contract without penalty. Now, the key here for you though is look at line 70. You need to put the appraisal date, the loan contingency deadline, out to the end of the contract or close to the end of the contract. So if you've got a 35-day contract, you put 34 down there. But you don't want to use the 25, which is a default, because the appraisals come in late. So you add time. If it's a 45-day closing, put 42 in there. That's when the appraisal is going to come in. It's going to come in late. And that way you've got time for your buyer to review the appraisal and to make a decision on what to do. Everybody understand what to do? You're all so good. Page 3. Oh no, is this 2? Yeah, 3. Thank God. We're getting there. All right, financing contingency. Not contingent on financing. They're paying cash of some type. So over the years, we bought a bunch, 50 houses or so, to rehab or flip, whatever you want to call it. I call it rehab. Sounds nice. And I typically pay cash. And so I would check this box if I was buying one. But notice what it says, buyer may finance any purchase price, but I'm guaranteeing I've got the money. Because in other words, let's say it's a $100,000 house, and so it's gonna cost me $100,000 in cash. I might change my mind and say, you know what? I'm just gonna put out 50 and borrow and use my other 50. I'm gonna borrow 50 from the bank, use my other 50 to do the rehab. But I'm guaranteeing that I've got the money to close, is what I'm saying. 2, non-conventional. This is any government loan, any kind of government loan. So when you talk to your buyer, say, what kind of loan you get? And they go, well, the lender said we're getting this. Like, you call the lender and the lender goes, it's an FHA, or it's a VA, or it's a USDA, or it's an MHDC. And then you check that box. If you check box number 2, you must include the rider. Are we good?
Include the rider?
Yeah, there's a rider right there that says, if this box is checked, then complete and attach the applicable rider. As an example, that's what EG means, right? Government loan or seller financing or loan assumption. Well, it's going to be a government loan. We're not going to do much seller financing. We're not going to do much loan assumption.
So
Typically, it's going to be a government loan.
that writer outlines the terms
Yeah.
of that loan, is it? Okay,
Well,
so. Kind of
yes, kind of. It's just a document for the lender that says,
defined.
and for the buyer or the seller that says, look, we're getting a government loan. Now, it used to be in the old days when I was younger, government loans were scary. FHA and VA, man, they just ripped houses apart. It's not like that anymore. They're just pretty much typical loans. They still ask for things like handrails and fix the broken window and fix the chip paint, but they're not scary anymore. The first house I ever sold VA, I had to install a new water line because it was on a well, but county water, it was in Branson. It was like 150 feet away. I had to dig it by hand. I mean, that's how hard, my first sale. I was getting it done, and I had to drill through the foundation too. And I ran the pipe and.
How deep do you have to go on that water line? 18 inches?
No, 3 feet, almost. I was younger, like I said, but I was gonna close it. So I got it done. It wasn't a big deal at the time. I thought everybody did that. I've dug up septics too. You're not supposed to do that either. I mean, you can, it's just hard work, you know? All right, so conventional loan just means that we probably are putting down at least 5% on the loan. And it's not gonna be government backed. The bank's making a loan based on, these are typically better buyers on a conventional loan, stronger buyers. But I'm still putting on the loan contingency deadline on line 88, the term of the contract, right? And the reason being, if the last week of the contract, if you put 25 days and the contract was 37, on day 34, the lender calls you and goes, hey, he's got a bad debt, medical debt we just found. He's not gonna be able to buy the house. You're screwed, not you aren't, the buyer is, because look what it says on line. I'm down there, baby, where are you? Look at line 106. If the loan contingency deadline passes without a termination, buyer remains obligated. That means everybody. It doesn't, I mean, if you're a government loan or anything else, good luck collecting on those, but the point is, if it passes, then you've got to buy the house. You've, under this contract, must have available all funds required to close. So you put the loan contingency deadline to protect your buyer out far enough that if the lender calls and goes, we got a problem, we're not gonna be able to close, then you can get your client out of the contract without penalty by sending over on line 93 a buyer's financing contingency affidavit. But it has to be done on or before that 37th day. But if you put 25 in there, that's no good. Because the lender calls you the last week right before closing. They don't call you 3 weeks into the deal.
Can you put and like the special provisions or whatever, to run till closing, does that count, or is that?
Yeah, everybody does that. I mean.
Does it protect them the same way?
The attorneys don't like it, but yeah, you can. People do that. They put all contingencies within the contract to remain or to run through closing. I mean, you can. People do it. I don't like it. And most of the brokers don't like it, but you can certainly. Everybody hear that one? I'll show you where it goes. All right, so complete one or both, either the loan amount or the purchase price. It's easier to do the loan amount. They're putting down 5%, which is what she said. Now, if you put down 95% is what you're going to borrow, it doesn't mean you have to borrow that. You just got to borrow that or less. Doesn't matter. So, I mean, the buyer could put down 10% if they want to, but they're going to put down at least 5 as a down payment. Interest rate not to exceed 8%. Why is this important? Current interest rates hovering somewhere between 6.5 and 7. Now, if I'm going to protect my buyer, I'm going to call the lender and say, at what point, what interest rate can't they buy this house? And he might go 7.75. That's what I'm putting in there. Because that protects my buyer, because if the interest rates goes over that, that could happen. Hell, they raised, in 4 months, they raised it 3 points in 2023. Yeah, 2023. From November to January, it went up either 3 or 4 points. So if you want to protect your buyer, you find out what their top is, and you put that in that blank. And the amortization term's almost always going to be 30 years, and it's almost always going to be fixed on 99. All right, we're down to 109 on title and survey. And the first line is, it just says, any seller paid title fees are in addition to seller concessions. In other words, the seller's given $4,500, right? But they don't get to take their title cost out of there. They've got, that's in addition to that. They just want it spelled out in the contract. So it's not going to affect your buyer's concessions that you're trying to get for your buyer. That's what I'm saying. All right, seller has to transfer marketable title of property subject to only the permitted exceptions as directed by buyer. And a general warranty deed, that's the strongest deed in the state of Missouri. And it's got to be executed and it's got to be recorded. This is important, and we leave this alone most time. 10 days, we want a title commitment. And the title commitment, I mean, when you see your first one, you're going to go, oh, you know, it's really not your job to read it, but a good title company will tell you. They'll send you the title and they'll say, we've got a problem, look at 2B. or something like that. And it might be a federal lien against the property. It could be a state lien, tax lien. It could be child support, because they look for that all the time now. It could be, I don't know, those are the best examples. There's a lot of other examples it could be. We can go through all of these, but the best one is number 3. Seller delivers to buyer a title commitment at seller's cost. Seller's gonna say, okay, title company, do a search and make sure that it's free and clear, or that I have clear title and able to transfer. And then the buyer is gonna pay the title company money to ensure that title during their ownership. That's what's fair. Everything else is somebody's paying higher than they should, in my opinion. And you can read them and understand them. Understand this, the seller, the title commitment, the search is probably gonna cost $200. The buyer's policy might cost $1,000. We don't want the seller paying for the buyer's policy and not live in the house. So that's pretty simple action. And then again, on 118, you can see Meridian Title is the one, they were on the front page, that's where we're gonna close. Makes sense for them to issue the title commitment and the title policy. Once you get the title commitment, they send it to you, typically this agent, Mr. Agent, and you forward it immediately to your buyer. Your buyer doesn't know what the hell it is. They can't read it probably any better than you can. Now, over time, you'll get used to reading them. But as the example I gave you, if it says it's got a federal tax lien on it, you let your buyer know, we will not close until this tax lien is taken care of. And the title company won't either. Taxes come first. You learn that in real estate school. They always pay taxes first. It could have 10 liens on it, but if it says tax, they get paid first. Government wants their money. Buyer has 10 days to review this and say, okay, I'm accepting it, or you don't have to say anything. Or if there is a problem, you have to notify the seller, and the seller they either have to fix whatever is wrong with the title, the deed, or the contract is terminated without penalty. Now we're on page 4. That's basically what it all says, okay? All the title stuff it says. We're gonna do a title search. We're gonna send the title commitment to the buyer. If there is an issue, and we're going to use federal tax lien, then the seller is going to have to fix the federal tax lien before we can sell. Because it has to be a marketable title, which is not if it has a federal tax lien. And it's got to be recordable. You can't record it with the tax lien to somebody else, because that tax lien stays with the house. We had one just recently where a girl and her uncle inherited a house, and she owed $6,000 from 2015. Guess what Discover did? They attached it to the house. And once it's attached to the house, can't sell it until it's paid off, cleared.
So they pay the $6,000 then?
Huh?
So they have to pay the 6 before?
Yeah, it's gotta be paid before.
Yeah.
And paid, recorded before the title company, recorded with the county or wherever it's at, before it can be cleared. Yeah, it was a mess. Girl says, I don't know that. I really think you do, you know?
So you better pay like the rehabbers and stuff, like that you do?
Yeah, or they could put a lien on the
Yeah.
house, yeah. Yeah, the people, the subcontractors that work for you, they need to be paid. But they ask that at closing too. Are there any liens out there that are outstanding? Now, if you're the seller and you lie, then you're committing fraud, so you could get in serious trouble. You don't want to do that. Pay them, you know? And a lot of times, even with subcontractors, it'll say, exclusive contracting. And it'll have a bill for $600. And it's to be paid at closing from the seller's proceeds. All right, if you want a survey, if your client wants a survey, then they need to tell you. And if they do, there's 3 choices on the survey writer. Now, if you're getting, again, if you're getting rural property that's never been surveyed or been in the family for 50 years or whatever, it's a good idea to get it surveyed. I always ask the seller to pay for the survey in my offer. I ask, and then if they counter and say, no, you pay for it, then I counter and say, seller and buyer to split the cost of the survey. And if they counter that and I still want a survey, my buyer still wants a survey, then the buyer pays for it. But I'm gonna try to get the seller to pay for it. Because the survey can also show up with the title objections, right? Discrepancies. They're selling 50 acres, it comes back as 40. They're selling 50 acres, it's got an easement right down the middle of it for a road. They're selling 50 acres and it comes back with sinkholes all over the property. I mean, just anything can happen. So sometimes on rural property or property that's of acreage, I would suggest that you might discuss it with your buyer. But there are different kinds of surveys. So when you look at the survey writer, make sure your buyer knows what kind of survey he's getting.
Is this agreement on price, Jim, a line item potentially on a contingency, not a contingency, but like a counter offer? Is that where you negotiate that?
For what?
For like the inspection fee that they're gonna split or?
On the survey costs? Yeah, they'd counter. It'd just be an amendment, just a counter form. Just counter and say,
And there might be a lot of other items, but this could be one of the items on that.
I keep them separate. Inspections over here, surveys over here, concessions over here. Once you've made the concessions, you've made the concessions, Mr. Seller. Now, if you have to put a new roof on the house, that's something totally different. If the survey shows or the title shows that you owe a $40,000 tax lien, that's somewhere different. Those are, just keep them all separate. Don't put them all together ever. They've already agreed to the concessions, right? I get an inspection, they've agreed to the roof, right? I mean, I'm saying they have. Now the title comes back and says, hey, you owe 40,000 in federal tax liens. That's a separate issue from the roof or the concessions. Yeah, I mean, if you're the seller, you just keep subtracting money, but it's not the buyer's fault. The buyer said, look, I'll pay you all this for this house. And then you find out that you owe all these other things. D was added. If you look at line 160, I'm skipping C because that's all title stuff. But on D, the limitation of title objection rights, all recorded subdivision indentures, covenants, declarations, and restrictions shall be permitted exceptions. In other words, I don't care about the subdivision CC and Rs. Buyer waives its right to object to any. This house was built in 1950. It's been in the same subdivision for 75 years. It doesn't have a pool, doesn't have sidewalks. I mean, none of that. So there's really not much to object to here, right? So her buyer, and Hillary's a good agent, had her just check, but look, I'm not gonna deal with that. There's no issue here. Now, you got a buyer that's buying an Anthony Park. You might wanna leave that unchecked because it runs through closing to see what all there is there if you haven't had time to read it. But I would read the CC on Rs on a subdivision. But let's say Anthony Park, everybody's been paying $250, say $500 a year for HOA dues. And it turns out that somebody absconded with that money and now they're gonna charge every homeowner in there. So you buy the house, you've automatically bought into that. So those are the kind of things you look for in that. So it's up to your buyer whether they want to check that box or not. Inspections. Look at the first line of the inspection deal. I love it. Property is being sold in its present condition with no warranties expressed or implied, except as may be given to buyer in writing. What does that mean? As is. Really, when you look at a house, you're buying it as is. So if you've got concerns about it, then you should. Conditions of property disclosed or clearly visible should be considered by the buyer in setting the purchase price or making correction of such conditions by seller, a requirement of the contract. In other words, I walk up to the house and, the glass in the door is broken. I'm either gonna adjust my price or ask for it to be fixed. I walk into the house and the dog going all over the door. Never seen that, have you? I'm either gonna reduce my price or ask for concessions from the seller, repair this prior to closing. Hole in the ceiling. Leaky spot, either reduce the price or ask for it in the contract. That's what that's saying, because if you don't, you're gonna say, well, I'll just wait for the inspection. Well, the inspector's concerned with big ticket things, they look at little things too, but they don't might say anything about the scratches on the door, or they may miss the broken window. So if I see it as a good agent, I'm gonna point it out to my client and say, you know what, I love this house, but I think there's some issues here that, you notice that and you notice this, we should either write in the contract in our offer for the seller to repair these prior to closing, has nothing to do with the inspection later, or we should reduce our offer. Or adjust our offer. We don't have to reduce. You don't have to use that term. Now, the buyer can do the inspection himself. I bought a house, I could go inspect it myself. Not a good idea. You should get a third party, pay the money, have them inspect it. What's crazy, as it says also in that paragraph, the buyer can do their own appraisal. We're not qualified, bank won't accept it, so it doesn't matter. You're better off doing the third party stuff. All right, next paragraph B on the inspection section. Excuse me. Within 0 days after the effective date, this is called the property data review period. Buyer may review additional data regarding the property, including but not limited to anything. So this one, if you put the time in there, which is 5 days, means the buyer can walk. They can terminate the contract without penalty. They can just come in and go, you know what? After reviewing all the data, I've decided I want to buy this house. So Hillary mentioned that, and I said, Hillary, if you put 5 in there, I'm countering at 0 because it's my listing. So I'm not going to accept that because I'm not going to let the buyer walk after 5 days because they got a headache or they don't like the color of the paint or they showed their mother-in-law and she bitched them out, something like that. Because it can be anything. All you got to do is, and you don't even have a form for it. You can use one, but all you got to do is send an email saying, after reviewing the contract and the property data regarding this property, I'm terminating the contract. That's it, they're done. Now, it includes in there, criminal activity, what's the other one? Registered sex offenders. I get all that. But if you're concerned about that, when should you do that? As a buyer?
Before you ready.
Before. I mean, you can go right on the sheriff, Greene County, or you can go on the highway patrol, and they got all those babies on their sex offenders listed. Criminal stuff, you can go on Greene County or the Springfield Police. If it's Springfield, I'm sure Dixon and all the rest of them have it. And it'll tell you where all these incidents are. You'd be surprised because if you don't widen the map out, it looks like the city's on fire, But if you widen it out, you can see it's kind of spread out quite a bit. But I don't accept that, but you can do whatever you want to. Now, if you're representing your buyer and you want to protect them, then you might put 5 in there. All right, so C, it's on page 4, and then goes on to 5. You can get an inspection, and listen, you can hire an inspector to inspect anything in the house. It's typically mechanical, structural, roof, crawl space, plumbing, electrical, and so on. But you could have them inspect you could have a separate inspector for the foundation, you could have a separate inspector for the electrical. But they can inspect anything. And you want them to inspect everything, right? If it's on a well and a septic, you want to make sure you get those inspected also. Septic inspected, well inspected. Now, listen to me. If it's on a septic, if you don't put in the special agreements that the seller is going to uncover the septic, then the buyer is going to be out there with a shovel or paying for it. So seller agrees to uncover the septic for the inspection and to recover when complete. If you don't, it used to be in the contract, but they took it out, so now the buyer is responsible for all inspections. Anyhow, we get all the inspections. How many can we get? Anything. But you have a limit on how you can do it. So down here on 185 on page 5, never put less than 15 days in there. That's how long you've got to have it inspected. And as soon as you get the contract signed by all parties, you better be calling an inspector. Now, the buyer is supposed to do it. Hell, you can't depend on the buyer, so you got to do it yourself. You find out from them, we've got a list of inspectors who they want to inspect it, and you make the phone call. Get it set up as quick as possible. Can the buyer attend the inspection? Yes. Should they? No. But they can. All right, so we've given them 15 days, but we get to day 14, we're still not quite ready because we've got to get a roofer out there to look at it, okay? So we text or email the other agent and say, we're going to have 5 additional days for the inspection period. You could use a form, MSC 2047N, but you don't have to, as long as you put it in writing. Now, if you call them, it won't work. Text or email the agent and say, we need an additional 5 days for the inspection period. It says for a specialist. It doesn't have to be for a specialist. Let's just say your client's not real responsive and you don't have a written notice back yet. Okay? All right. Then look on line 183. We're going to send the inspection notice, but we only get one inspection notice, so it's got to include everything. It has to include the electrical, the plumbing, the cracks in the brick, the foundation, the electrical mass. I mean, everything's got to be included. If the well comes back tested bad, it has to be included on the inspection notice. If the septic's bad or is failing or is undersized, it's got to be on the inspection notice. So you put all of that in there. Now, how do you write that? Write this down if you're brand new. Seller agrees to repair or replace, just put a little blank there, per the inspection report, page blank. I do that on every one of mine. Seller repair, replace, whatever it is, per the inspection report, page. So they can, and I send them the inspection report as soon as I get it. Whoop, there you go, Mr. Listing Agent. And they can look on page 34 and there it is. You know, the toilet's leaking on the floor. Page 46. Oh yeah, that breaker's bad. Or it's double tapped or some stupid thing like that. Yes, ma'am.
Does it hold to say, seller agrees to repair, replace blank per inspection report page by like certified and whatever they're choosing?
Qualified contractor is the best.
Can
way
they
to
choose
do it.
their contractor? Can you put in there like by, contractor of their choosing,
Of the seller?
of the buyer's choosing?
You just put the contractor's name.
Okay, because if they want, they don't want Joe Dono.
Yeah, they could put Skinner Roofing.
Okay, cool.
Seller to repair or replace a roof through using Skinner Roofing. See the attached bid, if you've got one. Yeah, you could ask them to do it. You could have your contractor make the repairs. And a lot of times they'll fight you over that, but it's okay if you want to get that done. But that's the best way to write it. Got it? Seller to repair or replace blank. Per the inspection report, seller agrees to use Skinner Roofing to repair, replace roof. You're right. All right. So we send over the notice and then the seller has 10 days to respond. And they've got to respond in writing and it has to be signed by all parties or you don't have an agreement. If
you don't have an agreement at the end of 10 days signed by both parties, the contract automatically terminates without penalty to the buyer. So I've gone 15 days, I send over the notice, I'm not late, I keep it, get it over there. The seller doesn't respond, finally responds on day 9, says, I'm gonna do 2 of the 27 items you asked for. I wait 2 days, the contract terminates, I go find him a different house.
So it's always 10, or would it be 15 since that's inspection is?
No, because the resolution period is on E,
Okay.
that's 10. Now, once you look at 199 though, limitation of inspection rights. If we don't have that box checked, then the buyer can simply do the inspection and terminate the contract. So we're 20 days into the contract, we got 15, and we asked for 5 more, and the buyer goes, you know what? I'm not gonna buy this house. I mean, you love your buyer and all that, but at the same time, you know that the repairs that need to be done aren't like, you don't have to rebuild the house. We just need to ask for the repairs. If you do not check 199, then the seller doesn't get the opportunity to even respond. The buyer just terminates. Do we like that? No. Here's what a contract's supposed to be. Look at me. Fair and balanced. Buyer wants to buy, seller wants to sell. Buyer says, hey, you got a bunch of problems with your house. What are they? I send them over. Seller goes, I'll fix them. Buyer gets to re-inspect. The inspection goes, the inspector comes back and goes, yeah, they fixed them all great. You got a great house. Think about this. Come up with 15 items on an inspection notice. But your buyer loved the house when they wrote the offer. They're gonna love it more once all those repairs are made because they didn't even know they needed them. Count your days on this, okay? All right, now we go fast for the rest of the contract. You got leave?
Yeah, I have to meet someone in a minute. There's a Zoom though, right?
Yeah.
Okay, in the car, I'll just zoom in. Thank you, I appreciate it. It's been very useful.
All right, municipal government inspections. Guess what? We don't have any in Springfield. We don't have any in Nixon. We don't have any in Bolivar. We don't have any in Ozark. The only place that's got a municipal inspection that I know about is Lebanon. They charge $50 for an occupied house. I think that's how it goes, and $10 for a vacant house, which is crazy. But we don't have them, so skip that paragraph, don't worry about it. Home warranty, the Achosa guys in, or sometimes you guys, if you're at a team meeting, he comes in the team meeting, you should talk to him. It makes sense to have a home warranty because it doesn't cost anything for the seller to put on it, the home warranty on the house. The only time the seller has to pay for it is at closing. So you're representing a buyer and your buyer goes, I don't know about that air conditioner or that furnace. I know the inspector said they're okay, but they're older. Ask for a home warranty. So it says on number 2, seller agrees to pay, but only at and upon closing towards the cost of a home warranty plan or service agreement to be ordered by buyer or buyer's broker, an amount not to exceed, I think it's around $600 now.
But if we're filling out this contract offer, and we haven't had any inspections yet.
I know, but you're just looking at it. You look at the unit, see whether it's old or new, right?
Sure.
I mean, if your buyers,
But that's when you're doing
the
this.
the buyer's gonna drive it. But I mean, if they say, we're really concerned because the house is older, it looks like the appliances are older. And you go, why don't we ask for a home warranty? It doesn't cover everything and it won't protect you at all costs, but it might offset any costs that you would have in the future, and it does. They typically, let's say it's a 15-year-old air conditioner, they might pay the whole thing. They might only pay half, but paying half's better than the whole. Because I can tell you over the years, 30 years now, probably 15 of those years, somebody buys a house and the air conditioner goes out the next day. Guess what? It's on that buyer. It's not on the seller because the seller didn't know it was going out. So anyhow, I would encourage you to think about having your sellers, when you get listings, put warranties on there. And I would encourage you to have your buyers ask for them. The seller can always counter and say, no. Yeah. All right, next page, we're on earnest money. Guess what? It's a mess. So you saw on this contract, they put down $1,000 in earnest money. Let's say this contract would have gone south and the seller and buyer, the buyer wants the earnest money because they're gonna terminate the contract, and the seller goes, I'm not giving it to her. It's just a battle. The money stays in the escrow account at the title company. It can stay up to 365 days. And then, if you don't reach an agreement, it goes to the state treasurer's office, end up unclaimed funds. Just a mess. So you're better off not putting very much down, first of all, sorry about that, I'm in line. But let's say you put it down. You're better off negotiating. If you terminate the contract, let's say you've been 20 days into this thing and you've got to terminate the contract because they can't agree on inspection. And then you terminate it and the seller wants some money. You gotta sometimes say, okay, you've been off the market 20 days. Here's 500, I want the other 500. You'll get it done that way, negotiating faster than you will wanting it all back. Paragraph 9, we have tornadoes in Missouri. If a house becomes a total loss, then the buyer could still receive the insurance check for the amount of the contract. Be kind of crazy if you're getting a loan. Or the buyer and seller can agree that the seller will return it to its condition when they wrote the offer, which would be okay. Or they can terminate the contract without penalty. Okay, paragraph 10, you'll love this. This goes all the way from 6. Go with me to the next page on 7. And go down to line 318 and 319. All the concessions and all the adjustments that you had to mess with when you went to school, you did, right? Had to figure out the lender. Look what it says. Any of these things paid by buyer, buyer's broker's fees, or any other expenses, fees, associated with closing, all as approved by buyer's lender. So the final say before you get your check, commission check, and the buyer gets their house and the seller sells their house is the lender. All the adjustments, go up here back a little bit, you can see. Seller shall pay for and buyers shall pay for where applicable, and seller concessions and add prorations and all of that. Guess what? It's all determined by the lender and the title company. So you don't have to do any of that. I know you spent a lot of time on that when you were taking your test, figuring out, you don't do any of that. Don't touch it. Don't even think about it. Not your job. If somebody says, what do you think the taxes are going to be on this? They're on the MLS sheet, says what the taxes were in that year. And so if they buy it at this time, they're gonna pay the taxes in November. And the seller is gonna get credited for this amount. How much do you think that is? Let me check with the title company. I'm not doing that. I mean, I'm not dumb, but I'm still not gonna do it. It's just not my job. Unless it's $1,200. If it's $1,200 a year, and we're on June 30th, then I'll do it. Because it's $100 a month. See, I can figure that really easy. My point is, they want something about the loan, talk to your lender. You want something about the adjustments of the closing costs or the prorations, let's talk to the title company. That's not your job. Your job is to fill in the blanks on this contract. All right, it is a binding contract. That's paragraph 11. That says, hey, look, you're both agreeing to this, so you're under federal law, state law, and municipal law. It's a binding contract. Got that? I tell my clients that all the time. It's assignable. You could write an offer to buy a house for yourself, and then all of a sudden think, you know what? I'm going to Florida. will you buy this house? And she goes, sure, I'd love to buy that house. You take an amendment out and you say, all parties agree that she is now the buyer. That's it. And the seller can't say anything, the title company can't say anything, it's just that easy. And then 1031 exchange, this is typically done to push tax liabilities into the future. So I buy $100,000 duplex, I fix it up, now it's worth $200,000, I sell it. I'm gonna pay $100,000 in capital gains tax at 21%. That's $21,000. I don't wanna do that. I could do a 1031 exchange and buy a $201,000 property and pay no capital gains. So that's what I'm gonna do. And if you've ever heard about or seen the book, Rich Dad, Poor Dad, he talks about it. Almost every investment guy will tell you about 1031 exchanges when it comes to it. If somebody ever tells you they want to do a 1031 exchange on something, it's called a like-kind exchange. It just means one investment property for another. So like we sold a video store in Branson back in 1994 or something like that. And bought a farm in Ash Grove. And did a 1031 exchange. We were saying, those aren't like kind. They're most investment properties, right? We sold videos or rented videos out here. We got hay and cows. They don't make any money, but it's still an investment property, according to the government. That's all you care about. If you do a 1031 exchange, title company is the key. And if you don't know what you're doing, you need to study it and talk to a title company. But the contract allows it. Obviously, the contract is not just these 11 pages. The contract is every document associated with the purchase. If you ever get into trouble and you have a lawsuit, which God help you, I hope you don't, get about one a year. We do about 5,000 transactions, so the chances are really low. But they'll ask for every document. So that's what that says. It doesn't say that, but that's what it means. The entire agreement is a part of the contract. On seller defaults or buyer defaults, if you have a buyer, you're working with buyers, and we're talking about buying here, and they come to you and say, you know what? I'm not buying the house. I've changed my mind. Inspections are done, the loan's ready, everything's ready to go, all the repairs are done. You need to tell them straight up, I'm gonna give you some advice, you should go ahead and close on the house. And you don't have to move into it, but I'll put it back on the market for you the day we close. And I won't charge you any commission on the list side. You still have to pay the buyer's agent, but I won't charge you on the list side. Because, you know, got a new roof, got all these repairs done, it might be worth enough to cover all that cost. But if you default, then here's what you're liable for. Specific performance, which means you got to follow the terms and conditions of the contract, which means they're going to force you to buy the house. And guess what? It's going to take probably 12 to 18 months for the courts to make a decision, and you're going to be paying an attorney for those 12 or 18 months. It'll cost you a lot more not to close than it will for you to close. The other thing they can do if you don't close and you're in default, Mr. Buyer, is they can charge you for damages for all the repairs they made. And maybe they were buying another house and now they can't buy it. And they've already moved to Florida and now they got to move back. They can charge you for all of that. Those are all damages.
Does it take a lawsuit to do that?
Yeah, usually. Your attorney's going to have to be involved. And then the last part of any default is any remedy under the law. That one scares me to death. That means anything. They charge you for anything. And the same thing on the other side, if you're representing the seller and they decide they're not going to close, it's the same thing. All three are exactly the same. We had one last year with Evan DeShong's team where a seller was under contract with a buyer, was ready to close, and the seller, the house they were buying, they lost it, so they didn't close. And the buyer said, buddy, sued him. Took 12 months. Seller had to sell him the house, had to pay him damages for the living arrangements for a full year. I mean, it was expensive. It was expensive. So Mr. Buyer, here's your options. I think the one I gave you is the best. Just go ahead and close and I'll put it back on the market. I'll have a sign back in the yard, 30 minutes after we close. But if you're not gonna listen to me, you think you're gonna default, then you need to call an attorney. And it needs to be a real estate attorney, not just anybody. We don't like defaults, do we? Nah, bad idea. Ignore 14 because that's up to the courts. On 15, you need to have a disclosure statement on everything. Even if your seller says, you know what, I'm not gonna fill out anything on this, Have them fill out what's required and then sign it saying they're not gonna make any disclosures. That way you can send it to the buyer anyway. It goes on the MLS and it needs to be on the MLS. Because if you don't put one on the MLS, look at B. Seller agrees to provide buyer with the seller's disclosure statement within 1 day if unstated. And then the buyer has 3 days to review it. And if they don't like something on there, they can terminate. Well, how would you like to tell your seller that you forgot to put the disclosure statement up? Bad idea. Or C, no seller's disclosure statement will be provided by the seller. Is that legal? Yes. State of Missouri says you don't have to have seller's disclosure statements. But our MLS says, yes, you do. Even if you're not making any disclosures, our MLS requires you to put it on there. Now, commercial, you don't have to have it. And then one other thing on here, and it's really important, 378, 382. Look, everything on here is true, but if something changes between now and the closing, I'll update the disclosures and I'll inform the buyer. For example, a tree falls on your house. Like yesterday, on somebody's house. You'd want to tell the buyer, we got a tree on the house. We've had Livingston Tree Service out there. They're going to cut it off. Skinner Roofing is going to repair the roof. We'll have it all done before closing. And if the buyer goes, if you don't make the closing date, we're not closing. Would they have a legitimate right to terminate then? Yes, we would. Because the house has changed in a material way since I wrote the offer, right? If it's got a tree on the roof. If it was built before 78, there better be a lead-based paint disclosure. They always say nothing. They say, we don't have any records and we don't have any reports, but you've got to have it signed by all parties. This is really a problem in the big cities on some of the properties, that have been built 50 or 100 years ago, whatever, because they might have lead-based paint. And what was happening was the toddlers were eating the chip lead-based paint and breathing in the lead-based paint. And, it causes brain damage. It's really dangerous. We don't have much of that. You fix lead-based paint 2 ways. Buy an old house and you test it and it's got lead-based paint. You can encapsulate it. You know what that means? Paint it.
Paint over him.
Yeah, dust can get out. It can't be scraped, paint it. Or you can scrape it to the bare wood, wearing a hazmat suit, using a vacuum and all that, and then paint it. So typically when we buy an old house, what do? Paint it. It's probably already been painted. Let's say you buy a house that's built in 1968. It's probably been painted a couple of times, right? It's 62 years, yeah.
Does painting over it reduce the risk?
It stops the risk.
So it no longer will be hazardous?
Nope. It encapsulates it. You know what encapsulate means?
Yeah.
To enclose, that's all it is. It's you're enclosing it, especially if you use, and what you typically do is an enamel paint. And if you use a sealer, even of any kind, and then paint it, there's no way any of it gets out. And typically where you find lead-based paint issues in older houses is stairs that have been painted or windows that have been painted because they go up and down and the dust rubs off. But if the window's been replaced and the stairs have been repainted, it's encapsulated. Okay, utilities have to be on for walkthroughs, period. doesn't matter who it is. Now, if you're dealing with a foreclosure company, they may not do any of that. Paragraph 18 on signatures, all they're saying here, and it says it a lot of different ways, but look, I can wet sign it with a pen, you can sign it electronically, and then you can sign it and then fax it. All on the same page if we're required to sign, and that's all legal. That's what they're saying. Because there may be a wife in town and a husband's back wherever they came from, or a husband's in town and a wife's back somewhere else. So you get an electronic signature on one and a wet signature on the other. And then a lot of times, like, I love to sit with my clients when they're writing offers. We do it in ink rather than electronically. But after that,
Pardon me. So you're sitting there with hard copies, documents like these,
Yeah.
filling them out
yeah,
and getting them, then when they're ready to be signed, you either fax them over to the
no,
operation.
we sign them right there.
Yeah.
We sign them and then we just scan them into the system.
Yeah.
But there's gonna be addendums and counters or whatever, then a lot of times we'll do that electronically. But I like face-to-face, sitting down with somebody and we're signing it and going through it, and it takes a couple hours, it's all right with me. I don't like, I was about to say, hey, sorry about that. I don't like the fact that we scan everything and we send everything electronically and nobody reads it, because like when somebody sends me a document, it says, you know, you're required to sign, and I push start, and it goes right to the signature. I haven't seen anything on the page, and neither is your client. I don't like that. That's scary to me. I mean, we'll get lawsuits for it, it's all over with.
Is a rider like the same thing as an addendum?
Yeah, addendum and amendment are the same thing.
Oh, well, is a rider the same as like an
No.
addendum?
An amendment changes, a rider adds.
Okay, so would a rider be like the other word for it, the like amendment? No,
They're two
so
different
it's
things.
not like a
Riders are required. So
Is a rider like a separate?
you see
form?
that in?
Mhm,
That's a notice. If it's got an R in the end, that's a rider.
okay.
And if it's an amendment, I don't think that's a note, I think it might have A on it, but they're used for different things.
Okay, I was thinking it was like a separate form that was attached or something.
It is a separate form if you need it.
Okay,
So for example, if I have my house is contingent on the close, the purchase is contingent on the close of the house that my buyers have, and it's under contract, then I would use I'm almost there, I'm sure, gotta be there. Right there. See on line 57 and 58 and 59? Those are riders. So they're adding information to the contract. They're not altering the contract, they're just adding information for the buyer to make a decision on.
okay, so that's why it wouldn't be either of those, because it's not actually altering it. It's
Yes.
just adding, okay.
It's adding additional information that the buyer or the seller has to have. A notice is saying, hey, we want you to know this. An amendment makes a change.
Okay, okay.
Yes, sir.
Since you were talking about how you take these out and you get them signed, the hard copies and everything. Once all the signatures are done on an offer and you've got a response back and it's been signed, so you've got a signed offer and all the paperwork. What does Keller Williams want you to do with that?
They just want you to provide a copy of it to your client. Now me, what I do, especially if I've got a mature client, you know, my age group is what I call mature. I drive the copies back out to them in a folder.
You don't have to turn a copy into Keller. or-
It's already in there if you do it in command.
But if you did it by paperwork, it's not.
You scan it, and
Scan
then you
it.
load it into command. You gotta load it into command anywhere, you don't get paid.
Okay, all the documents. Okay.
Under.
Sounds like someone's rolling.
Okay, good. We don't need another yesterday.
I think there's a storm on the way though.
Okay, we'll get out of here real quick then. All right, notice on number 20, paragraph 20. Well, 19 first. Seller and buyer, those are the terms we use throughout the contract, but there could be 10 sellers and there could be 10 buyers. Baby boomers are dying, they're leaving their property to their kids, and maybe they got 4 sons with 4 wives. Now you got 8 people got to sign the contract. So that's all. It's just saying, look, we just use buyer, seller to refer to all of them. On notices, do everything in writing. That's the best thing to do. No hugs and kisses, no matter how much you like the other agent or how smart you think they are, put it in writing. It's really important. When is a notice considered to be delivered? It's when it's sent. So I've got a notice, I'm delivering, inspection notice, whatever it is. If I put it, scan it, and I put it in my email and I push send, and it doesn't come back to me, it's been delivered. And so the other agent can't say, well, I didn't get it. So well, I sent it at 11:57. It was there at 11:57. It doesn't take hours or days or whatever. But do it in writing, no matter what you do. There's a rider. See all those riders there? Those are things attached to the contract. Once we get past the contract, then you either use a notice or an amendment. And see, in this one, we had the compensation rider. Why did she have the compensation rider there? So that she could get
Paid.
paid. Very good. You want to get paid, really important. But she didn't have a house to sell, and it's not a government loan, so she'd have to use any other rider. See now?
Yeah, that I was confused because the riders are like with the contract and the amendments would be after the
the
contract's
notices.
completed. Okay.
Yeah, notices or amendments come after you're under contract. Very good. That's a good job. I should have you come down and teach your class next time. All right, 432, it talks about, it's just not a good contract for new construction. There's actually a new construction contract now. I haven't used it. I'm not that familiar with it. I think if you'll come to the team meeting next week, Drew Beatty is going to talk about new construction contracts. Almost all the builders have their own contracts. So I don't know how many people are going to be using that contract, but they did finally get one designed. I mean, it wouldn't be a bad idea for you to pull it up because it seems like a lot of the sales anymore in new construction. So you might want to look at those. Notice in the special agreements, the only thing she added, seller will remove and dispose of the white shed and its contents in the backyard, which is the craziest darn thing I've ever seen. So there was a shed on a concrete slab and it needed to be painted. I mean, it was solid, had a good roof on it. He wanted it gone. So he took it down. You know why? They wanted to put a new shed on the concrete slab. Now, is that stupid or what? I mean, it's not stupid. It was just different. In fact, I told the other agent, said, you know, we could scrape that off and paint it. It's real solid. She goes, no, they want to put a new building there. Okay. I mean, I'm talking 8 by 8 or 10 by 10. Now, I'm not talking like a 4-car garage or something. Anyhow, he took it down, hauled it all off before closing. 23, if you're buying something for yourself or your family, then you need to disclose that. Including if it's you're buying it for your mama or your sister or your uncle or your brother or your nephew or your niece. I think even third cousin, ex-brother-in-law, I'd put it down there. I mean, I don't want anybody questioning my motives or because they wouldn't put that in there if the MRAC wasn't concerned. And then the sources of brokers' compensation on 24, notice the seller has agreed to pay commission. But in this case, Hillary is getting compensation from her buyer also. She's charging a buyer's fee, a buyer's agent fee. Can you do that? Yeah, you need to learn your buyer's employment agreement. You can get a, what do they call the first one? A retainer right up front, or you can get commission, or you can get an additional fee for just showing them. And a lot of people charge this. I think the average and normal is around $250, but some agents charge as high as $495 because that money goes straight to you. It goes to Keller Williams, but it comes right back out to you. Where your commission, until you're capped, is split with the company. But think about it. You go show 30 houses over a 6-month period and you still ain't got paid. That's expensive, right? It'd be nice to have compensation that is directly paid to you. And you could take it at the time of your employment contract, or you can take it at closing. Anyhow, she marked both boxes. And then also on 452, she wanted to make sure she's getting paid, so buyers requesting seller pay compensation, blah, 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 to the broker. And then 25, you're supposed to have a broker disclosure form signed or initialed by all your clients. You should do that right up front before you share any financial information or personal information. It's a broker disclosure form and it outlines the agency in the contract. So if I'm gonna get an employment agreement form signed, the buyer's agency, then I'm also gonna get the Missouri broker disclosure form signed, because guess what? It says we've already done it, right? So you want to do it before you sign the contract and lie. And then in this case, licensee assisting the buyer is not only a buyer's limited agent, but they're also a designated agent. And then guess what? If you're assisting the seller as a Keller Williams agent, you're a seller's limited agent, and you're also a designated agent. And you learned this in school, but, right, you're representing your client, but if you're designated, the brokerage is actually representing your client and assigning you as a designated agent. So that means I don't know anything about your client, but the brokerage still represents it. And signing below, there it is. There's Hillary signed it electronically. She's from Reese Nichols. She's got her license number. And there's Jim Bolden signing this one. And there is the state license number and all of the other stuff. And then, are we a franchise disclosure? Yes, we are. We are one. And then 27 paragraph that says we're going to send everything to the MLS, the closing price and everything, unless the seller or the buyer say not to, so that they can determine market value. That's the reason we do it. And then FERPTA 28 and 29, not your problem. Don't deal with it. You're not supposed to know. You know, are you going to ask your client, are you an illegal alien? Are you legally in this country? You know, are you going to do that? I'm not doing that. You know, are you a terrorist? I'm not doing that either. I leave that up to the title company. They got all kinds of searches they do. So skip at 28 and 29, let them do it. And then 20 or 30, when do you want to close? Or when do you want this offer to expire? They gave us, I think, 2 days. We didn't need 2 days. We were ready to sell. So we signed it. I'd say 24 hours is about the max on your expiration of your offer. You don't want it to go too long. Somebody else could come in and buy it. And then look here. Elizabeth signed it electronically. Jason signed electronically. Heather signed electronically. We're done.
All right.
That was it.
That was a good example.
Yeah,
Okay.
and if you go on, I mean, here's a disclosure of lead-based paint. Everybody always says they don't have any knowledge, they don't have any records, and everybody has to sign it. I got the MLS tied on this one. Gotta have it every time. You can't turn in a listing without putting this in there.
So that was a attachment that was with the contract,
With the listing
with
contract,
the listing.
employment agreement. Remember and it said in there, even in our contract, the purchase offer contract built prior to 1978, you must have a lead-based paint attached. So
Yes.
there it is. And there's a seller disclosure statement. And notice he didn't disclose anything after right here. But everybody signed it. Somewhere, page 6, there we are. There's a measurement disclosure. That's, all of that's online. You're gonna have all of that that will make an offer. So every document that's online. So you're looking at the MLS, right? You go in every day, or you will be looking at the MLS. There's a document section. So before you write an offer, click on documents, it'll have these documents in there. Lead-based paint, disclosure, aerial, feature list, whatever it might have. Okay.
Where do you typically, Jim, get most of your documents from, like the contracts? Do you get those off of GSBOR or do you?
I use, Missouri Realtors. I mean, I use Loop for myself. My partner, Lene, and my daughter use Command.
Did you say Doc Loop?
Loop is just it's a electronic signature, platform. We used it for years here and then Zillow bought it. And then because Zillow bought it, we didn't want to be dealing with that. I just never changed because I just didn't change. I don't like change.
So would you give this the compensation
Right?
agreement to them every time? Like, is this
Every time you make an offer.
every time you make an offer?
Yeah, you want to get paid.
Yeah.
So your buyer's making an offer, you call or contact the listing agent every time and say, is your seller offering compensation? You need to know, because let's say you signed an employment agreement, you've asked for 3%, right?
I wanna write that down.
Every time.
Okay.
But you've signed an employment agreement with your buyer that says, look, I have to have this contract with you to show you properties. You show them properties and they say, hey, I want to buy this house on Berkeley. And you go, okay, no problem. You call the listing agent, or contact the listing agent, say, is there compensation offered? And they go, no, unfortunately, my client's not offering any compensation. Then you've got to go back to your client and say, look, we're not offering any compensation. We've got an agreement for 3%. How do you want me to handle that? They're going to say, well, I can't pay that in most cases. So you have to ask the seller for it. And so you use a compensation rider on every offer.
Why would you call them? Let me see if I understand. Why would you call them and ask them if they're gonna pay? Because that's just verbal communication.